A farmer kneels in his neighbor's field at dusk, finishing her planting before he's touched his own, not because he wants to, because the order was set before he was born, and it has never once been broken. You are entering Tawantinsuyu, an empire of 12 million people that never used a single coin and never wrote down a single law. Every household counted on a knotted string. Every debt paid in days, not money. At the very top of it sat a man treated as a living god who could not choose his own meal, his own palace, and who, by most accounts of his court, burned the clothes off his own back before the sun went down. And underneath all of it sat one ordinary rule about what a son could and could not inherit, that nobody in the family ever questioned. That rule built this empire in 90 years. It also destroyed it in 5. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how. Level 1, the Yana. You leave through the stone gate of your elu for the last time. In your hands, a length of coarse cloth, woven by you, over many nights, the only object in this world that is entirely yours. You do not look back. Nobody tells you to. Nobody has to. Looking back is for people who expect to return. Most people under Inca rule owe the state something called mida labor with an end date. A season of planting, a month on the road, then home. You are not one of them. You are Yana pulled out of your community permanently, assigned to serve the state or a noble household for the rest of your life. Not a season, not a term, the rest of your life. Maybe you were chosen for a skill someone noticed. Maybe your parents were gone and there was no elu left to claim you. It doesn't change the walk out the gate. It doesn't change what waits on the other side of it. Scholars studying Inca labor describe this as a blur where obligation stops looking like tribute and starts looking like something closer to unfree servitude. You don't need the academic term for it. You already know what it feels like. From the inside, from the weight of the cloth in your hands and the silence behind you. Here is the part that will surprise you. You will not be mistreated. Not in any way you could point to. In 2023, researchers studied the DNA of servants buried at Machu Picchu. People gathered from every region of the empire, coast to highland to jungle. What they found: individuals who lived to old age, no signs of malnutrition, no signs of violence. Fed, housed, cared for, in a manner of speaking. And also every one of them buried far from the families who once knew their names. Not one pair in the whole excavated group turned out to be a mother and her grown child. That is not an accident. That is the system working exactly as designed. That is the shape of your new life now. Comfortable, complete, permanently unreachable. You will grind maize for someone else's table. You will carry water you will never drink. You will grow old inside walls you did not choose, among people who will never ask where you came from. The cloth in your hands was woven for travel. You didn't know that when you made it. You know it now. But you were luckier than the ones who never arrived anywhere at all. Level 2, the Micmac. The ones who never arrived anywhere at all are the ones like you. Soldiers surround your village at dawn, not to punish you, to move you. Your entire community uprooted at once. Elders, children, the sick carried on litters, herds driven ahead like an afterthought. Somewhere behind you, a temple you will never see again. Somewhere ahead, a valley you did not choose and did not ask for. The empire calls this resettlement. It has a purpose. Spread loyal populations into newly conquered territory. Spread newly conquered populations into loyal territory. Break the thing a rebellion actually needs. Neighbors who have known each other long enough to trust each other. You will not have those anymore. Neither will the people replacing you back home. You walk for weeks. Nobody explains where the walking ends. The road itself was likely built by people exactly like you, moved exactly like this, on someone else's orders, though you will never think to ask whose. When it ends, you are assigned a plot, a role, a place in the empire's ledger of tens and hundreds and thousands, a decimal grid stretched across an entire continent, so that no household is ever truly uncounted. Somewhere, a knot keeper has already recorded your family as a line of colored string filed among strangers. That is not the part that stings. The part that stings is smaller. Your village, wherever it was, wove its cloth a certain way, a pattern, a color combination unique to that valley, that river, that people. Inca inspectors use those patterns to track who belongs where. Wear the wrong one in the wrong province, and the punishment is immediate and it does not wait for explanations. So you keep weaving the old pattern, not out of pride, out of law. It is the only thing about you the empire has not redistributed. You raise children who will call this new valley home because they will know no other. You will not correct them. There is nothing left to correct them toward the old valley belongs to someone else's Micmac now, walking their own unfamiliar road, learning their own new ground the same way you are learning yours. The empire building around you does not think of this as cruelty. It thinks of it as architecture moving pieces until the whole structure holds. And the structure does hold. For now, what the officials call resettlement, the people being moved, have a different word for. Level 3, the Hatun Runa. You were never moved. The empire didn't need to move you. It simply arrived, one planting season at a time, and told you whose field to work first, not yours. According to colonial-era chronicles and the historians who have studied them since, Inca farming communities followed a fixed order of priority when the planting season opened. The fields of the sick were worked first, then the widows, then the wives of soldiers away at war, then the fields belonging to the temples, then the fields belonging to the emperor himself. Your field, the one that feeds your own household, comes last. Every season, every year, not because anyone hates you, because that is simply the order the list has always followed, and no one has ever reached the bottom of it early enough to change your place on it. You know this the way you know the seasons themselves. You've stopped expecting otherwise. Expecting otherwise would just mean being disappointed on a schedule. You work another family's soil before you touch your own. Your hands know this soil almost as well as your own. You've worked it every season for years. Watched this widow's children grow, watched her roof get patched by someone else's labor, the same way yours will be. By the time your own furrows are ready, the light is already going. You plant anyway. You always plant anyway. This is not punishment. This is not even considered unfair by the people enforcing it. It is simply how the Mida works labor, instead of money, owed to whoever the empire decides needs you more than your own family does that week. And the Mida does not stop at fields. It built the road under your feet to nearly 25,000 miles of it, stretching from the northern edge of the empire to its southern one, cut through mountains too steep for anything but stone stairs and rope bridges. Men like you built it, not soldiers, not slaves, exactly, in the way the word is usually meant. Just households, summoned in rotation for a set number of days until the work was done and then sent home to fields already waiting, already behind schedule. One Spanish Andean chronicler, describing the terraces cut into these same mountains, wrote that entire hillsides were brought under cultivation step by step, flattened like a staircase carved into rock. He meant it as admiration. He was not the one who carved it. You will never see most of the road you helped build. You will never travel it. It exists so that soldiers can move fast, so that messages can move faster, so that the empire that owns your labor can keep owning it efficiently from one end of the mountains to the other. Your crop will grow. So will the road you never chose to build. Level 4. The artisan. You do not build roads. You do not plant another family's field before your own. The middle labor tax, the thing that owns 3 levels below you, does not touch you at all. That sounds like freedom. It is not quite that. What the empire wants from you isn't your time in the fields. It's your hands. Specifically the skill in them, the years of practice it took to earn that skill, and the finished work only you, or a handful of people like you, can produce. Pottery, metalwork. Above all, weaving, the trade that runs through every level of this hierarchy, from the coarse cloth carried out of an elu gate to the finest cloth ever made in the Andes. You are good at it. Good enough that the empire noticed. Good enough that a state official once stood in your workshop, watched your hands for a while, and left without a word, which, you learned later, meant you had passed some kind of test you hadn't known you were taking. So instead of a labor quota measured in days, you have a production quota measured in output. A set number of finished pieces on a schedule you don't set for people you will mostly never meet, nobles. Officials. Sometimes, the temples. Sometimes, though you rarely let yourself think about this directly, garments destined for the emperor's own household to be worn once and never seen again. Your work leaves your hands and simply continues. Somewhere else. In someone else's ceremony. Someone else's household. Someone else's story about where their wealth came from. You will not be there for any of it. You will never be asked to carry stone up a mountain or plant a stranger's field before your own children eat. In exchange, your entire skill becomes property before it becomes anything else property, with your fingerprints still on it, but never, in any legal sense, yours to keep, sell, or refuse. There is a kind of peace in this arrangement. No road, no field, no widow's harvest to bring in before your own. There is also this. Nobody ever asks what you would have made given the choice. Nobody has asked in years. You've stopped expecting the question. The cloth you wove would outlive you. You would never know where it ended up. Level 5. The curaca. Somewhere, that cloth gets counted. That's your job. You are not Inca. You never will be, no matter how well you do this. You are a local leader, the kind the empire found already in place when it conquered your people and decided was more useful alive than replaced. So you were kept, reappointed, technically, under a new authority that speaks a language your grandparents didn't. Your title sounds the same as it always did. What it means has quietly changed underneath you. Your job now is simple to describe and impossible to feel simple while doing. Deliver the middle labor your community owes. Deliver the goods your community owes. The cloth, the grain, the metalwork, the coca. Deliver it on schedule, in the quantity the empire's quipu keepers have already recorded as owed, whether or not the season cooperated. You stand at the granary door and count sacks against a number you did not set and cannot argue with. A bad harvest doesn't lower the number. A death in the community doesn't lower the number. The number was decided somewhere else, by someone counting knots on a string, long before this year's rain fell short. Meet it, and you keep your position, the respect, the exemption from ordinary labor, the small comforts that come with standing between your people and the empire instead of underneath both. Miss it, and none of that is guaranteed to survive the season. There is no formal appeal for a curaca who falls short. There is only the arrival of an inspector and a conversation that ends with either a warning or a replacement, and you will not know which, walking out to meet him, until it's already decided. Scholars who study this system describe curaca authority as something closer to conditional than inherited power on loan, contingent entirely on your ability to keep producing exactly what the state demands, exactly when it demands it. Your ancestors ruled by birthright. You rule by quota. You have learned to push your own people harder than you'd like, because the alternative isn't gentleness. The alternative is someone else standing where you're standing, doing the same math, on the same people, without the years of trust you've spent building a stranger with no reason to soften anything. You tell yourself this makes you a buffer between your people and something worse. Most days you believe it. On the days you don't, there is no one you can say that to. Your authority was borrowed. It could be recalled without warning. Level 6. The Hahua Inca. borrowed authority, if you hold on to it long enough and disappoint no one along the way, sometimes gets upgraded, not inherited. Upgraded, which is not the same thing, no matter how carefully it's dressed up in ceremony. You were not born into this rank. You earned it through loyalty proven in campaign after campaign or administrative skill the empire noticed and decided to reward. Either way, you are now Sapa Inca, noble by privilege, not by blood. A real title. Real land. Real authority over people who answer to you now, instead of the other way around. It still isn't the same as being born to it. The blood nobility around you know the difference. Even when they're too polite to say it out loud. You know it too, in the smallest ways. The seating at ceremonies, the order names are called, the particular warmth that's offered to men whose grandfathers were already Inca when yours was still farming a mountainside somewhere in a conquered province. You don't correct them. You've learned there's no version of that conversation that ends well for you. One reward, though, tells you exactly where you stand, and it isn't subtle. The Sapa Inca himself sometimes gives out baskets of coca leaves to soldiers after a victory, to officials whose loyalty has proven itself. A Spanish Inca chronicler who documented this later wrote that the Inca elite placed coca before gold and silver and precious stones. It was not decoration. It was the highest currency the empire had, handed to you directly by the one person whose approval actually moves your position upward. You wear the cloak that came with your rank the way you were taught to wear it carefully, visibly, on the occasions when visibility matters. It marks you as elevated, it also marks you as watched. Because everything about this rank came from somewhere, which means it can also go somewhere else. The privilege was granted. It was never guaranteed to stay granted. You have started noticing which of your fellow Sapa Inca have quietly disappeared from ceremonies over the years, not disgraced. Exactly. No public fall from grace, no formal accusation. Just no longer necessary, which turns out to be a far quieter way to lose everything. You attend every ceremony you're invited to now. You make sure you're seen. Gratitude, in this system, was just another word for debt. Level 7. The Capac Inca. No debt of gratitude here. You were born owing nothing to anyone. Inca blood, direct descent from the royal line, exempt from every tax and labor obligation that has followed every person below you through 6 levels of this hierarchy. You hold real power. Administrative posts. Military command. Sometimes the priesthood. The empire's machinery, the curicas below you, the officials collecting tribute, the roads, the granaries, the entire architecture built by other people's labor runs, in large part through people exactly like you. You were raised for this, trained in it from childhood, tested against your own cousins in strength and endurance, because even blood nobility has to prove itself worthy in front of the family before the family trusts it with anything larger. There is one tradition, though, that gets explained to you early, usually by an older relative, usually as though it were simply how the world works, because to your family, it is. When a Sapa Inca dies, his political authority passes cleanly to his chosen successor. That part is straightforward. What does not pass is everything else. The land he conquered, the palaces he built, the treasure he accumulated. All of that stays with his own bloodline, his own panaka, the extended family formed around his mummified body, which will continue to be dressed, fed at feasts, and consulted on important matters for generations. The dead Sapa Inca, in other words, keeps his estate forever, which means the new Sapa Inca, whoever that eventually is, possibly you, possibly a brother, possibly a cousin, inherits the throne, and nothing that makes a throne comfortable. No palace, no treasury, no land already earning tribute. Your relatives explain this the way people explain any inheritance custom, with a shrug, a sense of continuity, an assumption that this is simply how honor works in your family. The dead are cared for. The living earn their own. You've heard the justification more than once. It keeps ancestors close. It keeps the dead involved in matters of state. It rewards conquest. Because conquest is the only way a new ruler ever gets anything of his own. Nobody in your family describes it as a problem. Nobody describes it as anything other than tradition, dignified, unremarkable, older than anyone currently alive, repeated at enough family gatherings that questioning it would feel a little like questioning the sun itself. You will spend most of your adult life either preparing to inherit a title you can't yet furnish, or, if you're passed over for the succession, quietly resenting whichever cousin will. Either way, the family keeps building. Every generation, someone conquers something new, because every generation starts again from nothing. It sounded like tradition. It was, in fact, a countdown. Level 8, the Vilik Umu. Someone has to make the countdown sound like destiny. That someone is you. You are the high priest, often a close relative of the Sapa Inca himself, which means your position was never really separate from his ambitions to begin with, and never will be. Your job is to interpret omens, sacrifices, the behavior of animals selected for ritual, the patterns in coca leaves, the movement of stars against the mountains that ring Cuzco. You train for this since childhood. In ceremonies, most of the empire will never be permitted to witness, let alone understand. When a new emperor needs conquest, and because of a certain inherited arrangement upstream of you, the one that leaves each new emperor with a title and nothing to furnish it, every new emperor eventually needs conquest. Urgently, you are the one who tells the empire whether the gods approve. The gods, in your professional experience, tend to approve. You would not put it that way yourself. You believe in what you do. The rituals are real to you. The sacrifices meaningful. The years of training and reading a llama's entrails or a burnt offering smoke genuinely sacred knowledge, passed down with real reverence. That belief and the political convenience of your conclusions are not, in your mind, in tension. Other people notice the tension anyway. They always have. Before a campaign, you perform the reading. If the signs are favorable, the army marches with confidence, believing Inti himself has sanctioned the bloodshed to come. If the signs are unfavorable, which happens occasionally, when the omens are simply too unambiguous to reinterpret the campaign as delayed, not canceled, rarely canceled, there is always another reading to be taken. Another day, another set of entrails. Until the answer the state needs finally arrives. You tell yourself this is patience, not pressure. Most days, that distinction holds. You preside over festivals too, Inti Raymi, the great celebration of the sun, when finely woven cloth and offerings are burned before the entire court, smoke carrying wealth upward as proof the empire can afford to destroy what it has, in full view of everyone who cannot. You have performed this ceremony more times than you can count. You have never once been asked whether you believe the smoke actually reaches anyone. You have never once said, out loud, that some nights you're not entirely sure yourself. Between the throne and the sky, you stand exactly where the empire needs a priest to stand. Close enough to divinity to be trusted. Close enough to power to be useful. And never quite able to tell, some nights, which one you're actually serving. The gods, as it turned out, always agreed with the man who needed land the most. Level 9. The Apu. The man who needed land the most is you now. You just don't have any yet. You are Apu, a regional governor, a member of the royal family, someone with real command over one of the 4 quarters of the empire. You have soldiers. You have administrators answering to you. What you do not have, walking into your father's palace for the first time after his death, is a single room that belongs to you. The palace is exactly as he left it. His mummy sits inside it, dressed each morning, offered food at every meal, attended by servants who have not stopped serving him just because he stopped breathing. His panaka, his bloodline, his household, his wealth remains here intact permanently. None of it is yours. None of it was ever going to be yours. You will build your own palace. You will conquer your own land to fund it. This is not a metaphor. This is the literal structural requirement of being Sapa Inca, a title that arrives empty every single time by design. Academics who study this system have a name for it: split inheritance. Political power passes down cleanly. Material wealth does not, it stays locked with the dead, generation after generation, which means every new ruler inherits the same problem his father did: conquer or rule from nothing. For 90 years, this worked exactly as intended. It is, according to the historians who've traced its effects across two empires, the actual engine behind the speed of Inca expansion, not glory, not destiny, but a structural need for new land that never went away, because it could never be solved, only postponed, passed to the next ruler and the next. Then Huayna Capac died suddenly of an illness no one in Cuzco had ever seen before, one that had likely reached the empire faster than the Spanish themselves eventually would. He left two sons behind who both believed the throne belonged to them: Huáscar, raised in Cuzco under the old customs, and Atahualpa, raised at his father's new northern capital, commanding his father's most seasoned army. Neither inherited an intact empire. Both inherited the same structural emptiness every emperor before them had inherited, and this time there were two men trying to fill it at once, each with an army, each with a claim, each convinced the other was the usurper. The war between them lasted 5 years. It burned through the very administrative system. Split inheritance had built the roads meant for messengers, now carrying orders for troop movements, the granaries meant for famine relief, now feeding armies instead. The loyalty networks curacas had spent lifetimes maintaining, now forced to choose a side or be destroyed by whichever side won. All of it turned inward against itself instead of against an outside enemy. Cities that had stood for generations changed hands more than once. Families split their loyalties between brothers the way the empire itself had just split its inheritance. One historian, studying exactly this mechanism across Andean empires, put it plainly: the same practice that drove the speed of imperial expansion also generated the stresses that eventually led to imperial collapse. You do not know that word yet: collapse. Nobody around you does. You only know that Atahualpa has just won, that Huáscar is a prisoner, and that a small group of pale, bearded strangers has recently been sighted on the northern coastmen. Nobody in this civil war has had the time or the reason to take seriously yet. The system that built the empire in 90 years would unbuild it in 5. Atahualpa did not know that yet. Neither did the men about to arrive by sea. Level 10, the Sapa Inca. The men who arrived by sea number 168. You have 12 million people. This should not be close. But you are Atahualpa now, fresh off a civil war you won only months ago. And you have just walked into a trap disguised as a meeting in a town square in Cajamarca, surrounded by an escort left deliberately unarmed as a gesture of peace toward men you still believe are more curiosity than threat. Within hours, thousands of your men are dead. You are a prisoner of a foreign soldier named Francisco Pizarro. You offer the only thing you have ever known to be absolute: wealth. Fill a room once with gold, you say, as high as a man can reach. Fill it twice more with silver. In return, you ask for your life. Your people deliver on it, object by object, ornament by ornament, temple decoration by temple decoration. Gold and silver arrive from every corner of an empire that has never once used either as currency treasure, valued today at hundreds of millions of dollars, gathered purely to buy back a single life. Your life. The life of a man your own people call the son of the sun. Pizarro executes you anyway. This is where the story usually ends. It is not where the paradox ends. Because before any of this, before Cajamarca, before the Civil War, before the ships were ever sighted, being Sapa Inca meant something specific, and none of it looked like freedom. You could not leave your palace without hundreds of people gathering around you, because a god does not simply walk down a road unaccompanied. Every meal, Every garment, every object that touched you passed through layers of ritual most of the empire will never witness. According to accounts of the imperial court, your clothing was worn once and burned by nightfall. Nothing that had touched your body could be kept, reused, or handled by anyone else, because your body was not, technically, only your own. It belonged to the sun. You simply lived inside it. You inherited an empty palace, the same as every Sapa Inca before you. You inherited a father's mummy next door, dressed each morning by servants who will one day dress yours the same way, serve forever. Owning everything, touching nothing twice, a kind of yana no one below you would ever recognize by that name. The farmer at the bottom of this hierarchy gave away his own field's harvest last every season without exception. You, at the top, gave away every object your divine skin ever touched every single day without exception. Neither of you kept anything. 168 men are standing in a room full of gold that could not save you. The farmer at the bottom gave 2/3 of his harvest to a god he would never meet. The god at the top burned his own clothing every night, so no mortal could keep a piece of him. Between them stood a system that promised something to every rank and delivered freedom to none of them. Not the farmer, whose field was always planted last. Not the artisan, whose finest work he never saw again. Not the Karaka, whose authority could vanish over one bad harvest. Not even the emperor, who inherited a title and nothing else, and built an empire twice, once from nothing, and once, briefly, out of gold, that still could not buy back his life. The system that built Tawantinsuyu in 90 years, unbuilt it in 5. Neither of you was ever free. The cycle continues. Whew.